What's going on, guys? Last night, the unthinkable happened. The Edmonton Oilers finally fired Peter Chiarelli. Apparently happened during the second intermission of the Red Wings-Oilers game, which is pretty funny to think. Like, the Detroit Red Wings are the reason Peter Chiarelli got fired. At that time, actually, during the game, the Red Wings were last in the league. I remember, too, watching some of it and seeing them score, like, 2 quick goals against Koskinen and thinking, like, I don't know, this only looked like a $4.5 million goalie to me. And I guess the rest of the Oilers team didn't think so either, as by second intermission, Chiarelli finally got fired. Obviously, I think it's a little late. Probably should have been done after the Taylor Hall trade, or I mean, maybe the year after they made the playoffs and they were struggling again. Some bad contracts were given out. Probably somewhere in there he should have been fired, but at least they finally did it. You know, the saying, better late than never. So basically just wanted to review kind of Chiarelli's time in Edmonton, giving you guys my thoughts. Kind of like what his worst trade was, worst contract, things like that. And to do this, I'm actually using the cap-friendly site. They just recently actually added a thing where you can see like every GM's trades and signings, so makes this video so much easier. Right here on the homepage too, you can see the Koskinen signing there from yesterday. $4.5 million for 3 years is ridiculous. Honestly, I wouldn't have paid him more than 3, so the fact that they're giving him basically 50% more than the max is kind of crazy. Also, DeSmith here signed to 1.2. You could argue Koskinen's better goalie than DeSmith, but is he $3 million better? I'm not sure if you can argue that. So we'll see here. Peter Chiarelli, there we go. Obviously unemployed right now. I didn't know this actually. He started out as an assistant general manager for the Ottawa Senators before, of course, becoming the GM of the Boston Bruins for 8 years, 10 months, almost 9 years. A lot of people hate on his time there. Honestly, I feel like if you win the Stanley Cup, you kind of can get away with a lot of things. Like, that is the ultimate goal. And I guess we'll start off here with the signings. I just noticed, too, he's made a total of $1.3 billion for the signings in his entire career. That is kind of insane. So, with the Koskinen signing, apparently it wasn't just Chiarelli. Maybe not even Chiarelli. Apparently, like, the rest of the Oilers staff was actually a part of this signing. Wanted to get it done since, like, December. I wanted to quickly show you guys this here. So, even though Chiarelli is now gone, I feel like the Oilers are just getting started. Like, they have been an old boys club for so long, bringing back former players, even like former GMs they fire, they give them like a new role and stuff. It makes no sense to me. Like, clearly these guys aren't working, it's not happening. You made the playoffs like what, once in 10 years, something like that. You have the best player in the world. It should be easy. It shouldn't be this hard. So Bob Green there, director of player personnel. He's not too great either. If you guys didn't know, apparently Chiarelli wasn't really the mastermind behind the Griffin Reinhart trade. It was Bob Green and a few others, as Chiarelli had just become the GM of the Oilers. And basically, this guy didn't even see Reinhart playing the AHL, where he wasn't very good. Same with the NHL. Like, that's why he's a bust now. Not in the league anymore. He basically just talks about how good he was in junior, was like the captain of the Oil Kings, and how he was such a good player in junior. But it's like, there's so many good players in junior that don't, you know, turn into good NHL players. Not even have watched him play in the AHL and still think it's a good idea to give up a first and second round pick for him is insane to me. He mentions like twice too how he's 6'4". It's just crazy. So Wayne Gretzky there, vice chair. I mean, that one you really can't complain about. There's nothing wrong with having the greatest player of all time just to, you know, give feedback off of stuff like that. Now his brother just recently became the assistant general manager. I'm not gonna lie, I really don't know much about Gretzky's brother. I mean, without knowing much, I feel like without that last name and being Gretzky's brother, he's probably not the assistant general manager. So in that case, I feel like it's probably, you know, better people to fill that role. Ken Hitchcock is the head coach. So far hasn't been doing too bad. Katz as the owner, I think, might be where a lot of the issues lie. Always wanting to bring back former staff and players. Like, Kevin Lowe needs to leave. And the next year you have Craig McTavish, vice president of hockey operations. He was fired as the head coach and as the GM of the Oilers. 2 separate occasions, like, pretty funny. Bob Nicholson, obviously, used to be with Hockey Canada. Now he's, like, the CEO. Bill Scott, director of salary cap management. Okay, they're in cap hell. You gotta fire that guy. Like, how do you allow the Koskinen signing? The Chris Russell signing was ridiculous, too. Milan Lucic, so many bad contracts. Trading for Brandon Manning's $2 million when McDavid hates him. I didn't really make a video on that, but that trade was so terrible. The 2 assistant coaches there, it's whatever. But I feel like, to me, Peter Chiarelli is just a start. If they really want to have a winner in Edmonton, build around Connor McDavid, you got to clear out a lot of those guys, especially kind of like the guys that have been there for a while during that losing culture. But back to Peter Chiarelli now. Like I was saying, you look at all his signings here, just kind of give you guys my quick thoughts on them. Obviously, the Koskinen deal I don't think is good at all. That honestly might be one of the reasons why they got rid of him, whether or not it was his master plan or not. Now, Chason was a very good signing, $650K, league minimum. I think he's like their 3rd leader in goals behind McDavid and Draisaitl, maybe 4th behind Nuge. That's the kind of deal you need to make. Like, literally the cheapest deal you can make on a guy who, like, if he pans out, awesome. If not, it costs you nothing. Like, they need to be doing more of those deals. I'm just scared now, like, he's got a 1-year deal. Are they going to pay him, like, $3 million or something next year because of this 1 year of success? Like, that'd just be a terrible, terrible move. Ryan Strome there at $3.1 million. I think that was, like, the cheapest they could get him due to his last contract. Then, of course, they trade him for Ryan Spooner, who's now on waivers. So, traded Eberle for Strome. I think that's where they went wrong. Like, Eberle's a good player. He didn't have a great playoff. You've been to the playoff once. Like, I don't know. You just hold on to Eberle. Like, that trade was so, so bad. What else here? Like, a lot of just kind of worthless stuff. The initial cost being a deal, 1 year at 2.5. I honestly thought that was a little bit expensive. So, the fact that they gave him an almost double raise, ridiculous. Draisaitl 8.5, a lot of people said was way too high. Honestly, 7.5 is probably a better number for him, but he's such a good player. That's not the kind of contract he's going to do your franchise in. It's giving, like, Chris Russell $4 million a year. You can see that signing right there. Like, that's just way too much money for a stay-at-home D-man. I think he's been scratched a couple times. Then they bring in, like, Petrovic and Manning. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, $3.1 million initially was too much. Milan Lucic at $6 million. One thing I actually saw that was kind of cool, kind of cool and kind of sad. I'm pretty sure Chiarelli is the only guy who's ever given Lucic a contract. So yeah, as you can see here, Chiarelli gave Lucic his entry-level deal, $600K. That's awesome value. Then a 3-year deal, $4 million a year. Then another 3-year deal, $6 million a year in Boston, followed up by a 7-year deal, $6 million a year in Edmonton, and that's like at the latter half of his career. Oh my, like. That contract's so bad. Not to mention the fact it only happened because they traded Taylor Hall. Like, so much going wrong there. So, I feel like we've covered most of the bad contracts. Honestly, the big thing I think with Chiarelli is the trades. We'll go to the drafted players last, I guess. So, like I already mentioned, this trade here, Karrasen and Kajula for Manning, I thought was terrible. Not only because you're taking on Manning's contract, which is $750K more, and I think he's got 1 year less, but the fact that you're still paying him next year, and you're just adding him now because you have injured defensemen who will be healthy next year, which means you're going to have a $2.2 million defenseman scratched from the AHL. It's so dumb, especially when McDavid, best player in the world, best player on your team, hates him. I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me. Alex Petrovic, I also thought was a pretty bad trade. Chris Weidman's probably like about as good, and you're adding a 3rd round pick, just like hoping for the best. Now, the trade before that to get Weidman, I thought was really good value. Conditional 6th round pick. Ryan Spooner for Ryan Strome. At the time, I honestly thought that wasn't too bad of a trade. I thought it was pretty even. Maybe even Edmonton wins if they played him on the line with McDavid or Draisaitl and he started to produce. Unfortunately, he didn't do anything, and Strome's been pretty solid, like bottom 6 guy for the Rangers. So another one that doesn't work out. Cooper Marody, though, for a 3rd round pick. You trade a 3rd round pick for an AHL player, like at least like keep the 3rd round pick and hope for like a really good player in the draft and trade late, like at least a 5th plus for an AHL. Like that trade, I mean, he's just throwing around 3rd round picks. Like 3rd rounders aren't that bad. And I just noticed here that 3rd round pick actually came from Patrick Maroon, who was having a decent season there. Traded him for a 3rd rounder and a prospect at the deadline. Like, I would have held on to that. Pontus Aberg there, I felt was a pretty good ad. He's actually looked pretty good this year on Anaheim and Minnesota, not on Edmonton. I think they put him on waivers. Al Montoya, thought that was a pretty terrible trade. Gave up a 4th round pick for him, and he's in the minors right now, still being paid. I don't know, like just so many bad trades. But obviously, the worst few trades right here. Strome for Eberle, like, just inexcusable. Like, Eberle is such a better player. Even if he is a pending UFA this year and Islanders maybe lose him, if you have Eberle this year on Edmonton or even last year on Edmonton, they are such a better team. Like, maybe even this year they're in a playoff spot with all that extra production, especially playing him with McDavid. Yakupov, I mean, that's not his fault. He didn't draft Yakupov, whatever. Worst trade, honestly, by far, I think is this one. Taylor Hall for Adam Larson. And I'm going to quickly lay out for you guys why I think this is Chiarelli's worst trade of all time. Worse than the Sagan trade, Reinhart trade, etc. And it's because you're trading Taylor Hall, who before they got McDavid, face of the franchise, fan favorite, one of the best left wingers in the league. I think he was like a top 5 left winger over his career in the NHL, for a young, solid defensive defenseman. That just doesn't add up. I think too, around this time, Jason Demers got traded for Jamie McGinn. Now, Adam Larson is better than Jason Demers. I think that's pretty fair to say. But the difference between Adam Larson and Jason Demers is like small difference, like I don't know, opposed to Taylor Hall and Jamie McGinn, where I don't even think I can show you how big the difference is on my screen. So like they could have kept Taylor Hall, they wanted a defenseman like Larson, trade a Jamie McGinn or trade a 3rd round pick for Jason Demers, make him like the same salary as Larson, bring him in, you still have Hall McDavid, you have your defenseman, and in not trading Hall, that would have made sure that they didn't waste money on Lucic, who ended up being probably the worst contract signing for Chiarelli. For me, it's either him or Russell. Both don't really do much. They're both making way too much money, especially for their age. Still have turned back. Just terrible signings. And of course, making this trade even worse is the fact that Taylor Hall went on to win MVP 2 years later, playing for the Devils. I feel like we got robbed. We got to see, like, what, 40 games of McDavid and Hall together. It's honestly a crime. It's a crime against hockey. We didn't get to see more of that. And I feel like the reason that this is worse than the Reinhart trade is because you were trading draft picks. And apparently the rumor is they weren't going to take Barzal with that pick. They're going to take Eriksson Ek. So in that case, Eriksson Ek in a second for Reinhart is nowhere near as bad as Barzal in a second. So you have to look at it kind of like logically, right? Everly for Strome is a lot closer than Hall for Larson. And it didn't cause them to go sign Milan Lucic, one of their worst contracts. Plus Everly's not an MVP winner or anything like that. So I think for me, Hall for Larson, when Chiarelli did that, I went from being kind of like mediocre, like with him as a GM of the Oilers, thinking like maybe he'll turn it around for them, to just completely against him. Like, this guy does not know what he's doing. And the right below that is actually one of the better trades Chiarelli's made. I will give him credit for like the small trades. I feel like he wins, loses, or kind of breaks even on those kind of all equally, where the big trades, he pretty much always loses. So we got Patrick Maroon with 25% salary retained for a 4th round pick and an AHL player. Like, that's not a bad trade at all. Justin Schultz moved for a 3rd rounder. Now, as good as Schultz has been playing for the Pittsburgh Penguins, I remember watching Schultz in the Oilers. He looked terrible. Now, I don't know if that's coaching or whatever, but you probably couldn't have got more than like a 2nd round pick max for him. I'm not sure what was going on with him in Edmonton. Probably just like a confidence problem, but again, that could be more coaching than, say, GM. He traded him for whatever he thought he could. Now going back a bit further here, Zach Kassian for Ben Scrivens. I think that was a pretty solid trade. Not only, I think, good value, but also just giving Zach Kassian a second chance. I'm a Spitfires fan, so I love seeing that. Now going back even further than that, past all these irrelevant deals, I actually found a couple funny ones. So the Oilers gave up a 3rd round pick to hire Todd McClellan, who of course they just fired like a month ago. They also gave up a 3rd round pick to hire Peter Chiarelli to be the GM. So they lost 2 3rd round picks for 2 guys that they just fired. I think maybe they should learn, like, the next guy they hire for the GM, don't have it be a guy that you have to go up a draft pick to get, although I think they might have gotten rid of that. It makes it look even worse, though. Right there, of course, though, the Griffin Reinhart trade, Matthew Barzal and Mitchell Stevens. It's tough to look at. Like, take out the 2nd round pick, pretend like whoever they picked was irrelevant. Barzal, Eriksson Ek, whoever. Griffin Reinhart was a bust at the time, and even more of a bust now. How Snow got a 1st rounder and a 2nd rounder for Griffin Reinhart is honestly magic. It kind of shows you just how bad Chiarelli was when Garth Snow, who a lot of people consider to be the worst GM in the league, fleeced Chiarelli not only once but twice. Like, it's kind of incredible, to be honest. But those are all his trades. I mean, I think we all know them. It's just kind of sad, I guess, looking at just to see kind of how good this team could have been. Now, lastly here, I just want to talk about the drafting really quickly. Honestly, I don't think the drafting was too bad. I mean, Connor McDavid, a baby could have drafted Connor McDavid. For Boston, he did draft Sagan. Obviously, you're just going to draft Sagan or Hall. Ended up trading him, though. Puljujarvi was the obvious pick at the time. I still have faith in Puljujarvi to turn it around. Like Dylan Strome, you've seen on Chicago, is playing a lot better now out of Arizona. Obviously, hopefully for Edmonton fans, they can get Puljujarvi to turn it around while still on Edmonton. Playing with McDavid, I think like that would honestly help him. They don't really seem to be wanting to do that for whatever reason. And looking at some of his Boston picks, I noticed he actually did pretty well. Like Kessel 5th overall, Dougie Hamilton 9th. I mean, the Kessel trade for Sagan and Hamilton was one of the best trades ever. Like, people said how Brian Burke made one of the worst trades ever, even though I don't think it was that bad. Like, Kessel was very good during that time. The Zach Hamill picks, one of the worst picks ever, 8th overall. He did nothing, but I mean, every GM's probably going to have those. I also noticed, too, that he was the one that drafted David Pastrnak 25th overall in the 1st round of 2014. I didn't realize he was still the GM then. Obviously, everyone knows how good Pastrnak is now. That was a very, very good pick. So it looks like Chiarelli's average at drafting. Like, I'm not going to say he's the worst at drafting ever. Signings, obviously, he does have some really bad signings, but his Boston signings were actually pretty good, as he actually gave Bergeron the current contract he's on, which in my opinion is one of the best contracts in the league. So it seems like he somehow got worse at signing contracts as he had more salary cap available to him, or somehow after winning the Stanley Cup he became a worse negotiator. Honestly, I have no idea. Like I said, in terms of drafting, I would say he's been average or pretty good his whole career. Like, I'm not really going to take away too much from his drafting. It's the trades where his trades are all so bad. I did find, I think, what is probably his best trade. Some people might argue it's the Kessel trade I already mentioned, Hamilton and Sagan, but I feel like Kessel's a really good player to give up. This other trade here, he gave up what turned out to be like a backup goalie for a future starter. So right here, Andrew Raycroft for Tuukka Rask, 100% his best trade. It was the 4th trade he ever made as a GM, and yeah, like he fleeced Toronto. I think Brian Burke was the GM, or no, Brian Burke was not the GM. That was John Ferguson Jr. People always think it is Brian Burke and say how like terrible trade by him. John Ferguson Jr., who's one of the worst GMs ever, made that trade. So again, I feel like he's made 2 really good trades. Both, though, were earlier in his career. All of his worst trades have seemed to come in the last few years, which is unfortunate for Edmonton fans. Like, I don't know what's going on with him, why he can't, you know, judge the value of players right anymore, but it's unfortunate for the Oilers. I really hope they do turn it around. I want to see McDavid play more playoff hockey. It was a lot of fun a couple of years ago, and obviously you want to see the best players as much as you can, so if McDavid's going to the Stanley Cup Final, that's just like, you know, another 16 games you get to watch him. And obviously, too, I just kind of feel bad for them at this point. With, like, the Gagne and Colliano era, which was hilarious, the Hall and Eberle era, and now they're in the McDavid era, the best player in the world, in my opinion, and they still have only made the playoffs once in the last 3 years. Maybe they make it this year. Apparently, they're still trying to make the playoffs. I hope for Edmonton's sake they don't do anything dumb, like trade a first-rounder Puljujarvi for Simmons or Zuccarello. I feel like if they're 4 points or less out of the playoffs at the deadline, then they should try and make a move, but don't give up more than a second-round pick. We'll actually go and take a look at the standings right now, just to kind of see where they are, because as bad as they've been playing, a bunch of other teams in the West have been playing just as bad. So Minnesota there, 53 points. They had like a pretty bad run. They're starting to get it together, though. Colorado was like one of the worst teams the past month. They're still holding on the wildcard spot. Vancouver there, Anaheim. Arizona's ahead of them by a point now. Edmonton. So they're only 3 points out there of 2 different wildcard spots, but they're competing with like 7 teams for 2 spots. So that's what makes it tough. It's not so much like the distance, it's the fact that they got to be one of the 2 best teams out of 7, and a lot of those teams have been playing really bad hockey. We'll see if they can do it or not. I guess in conclusion, like I was saying, I think Chiarelli 100% deserved to be fired. I think his time in Edmonton was some of the worst GMing we've ever seen. Now, is he the worst GM ever? I don't think he gets to hold that title. I feel like he did a good enough job in Boston, winning a Stanley Cup, to not make him the worst GM ever. I feel like that's probably our buddy Mike Milbury for some of the trades he's made, but Chiarelli definitely, I don't think, is going to be getting a new GM job ever again. But besides that, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the firing of Chiarelli and what do you think the Oilers are going to do next. If you did enjoy it, leave that thumbs up. Also, guys, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Have a nice day, guys. Goodbye.